will get started with our webinar as part of our webinar series on mastering subscription success using AI. Today's topic is customer centricity, the C-suite playbook for sustainable subscription growth. We have a distinguished guest joining us today from Wharton Business School, Dr. Peter Fader. Facilitating the conversation will be Brandon Savage, Wazik AI's Head of Solution Enablement. Before I pass it to Brandon and Dr. Fader, quick background on how Brandon, Dr. Fader, and myself ended up on this webinar today. There's a very interesting backstory for all of this. Dr. Fader is the professor of marketing at Wharton Business School and is the author of 3 books on customer centricity. I have all 3 of them with me. They are absolutely fantastic reads, absolutely idea inspiring. I highly recommend this book. Instead of just getting just one, get 10 of them, give it to your team. You'll be glad you did that. This is full of ideas. So he's the author of 3 books teaching at Wharton Business School. Now the backstory is Brandon studied at Wharton Business School for his MBA. This is where he took some classes from Dr. Fader, fell in love with the idea. So it's more like a teacher-student conversation to check notes and all of that today. And then the third thing I wanted to say, Brandon immediately told me that, we should talk with Dr. Fader because of our alignment. We are all kind of saying the same things, doing the same things. Let's put our heads together and talk about these concepts. And that immediately sparked the idea because my doctoral thesis 20 years ago was also on the same idea that not every customer is equal. So we will all be talking about how not every customer is equal, how understanding that and operationalizing that is a strategic advantage. I'm not going to spill the beans, not say one more thing, because we have the best of the best, Dr. Fader, on the call. Brandon, please take it away.
Fantastic. Well, I'm super excited to have this opportunity to lead this just conversation that we're going to have about customer centricity, and I'll share my screen here to kick things off. When we talk about customer centricity, what do you mean by customer centricity in practical terms, and what originally prompted you to explore this idea in your research and in your books?
So I'm going to answer them in kind of reverse order. So the origins. I'm a math guy. You can see even some of the nerdy math stuff behind me here. I just like crunching numbers and looking for patterns. And it just so happens that looking at customer data for really any kind of firm, as long as you can get the data, is just a very rich source. And when you look at it the right way, without any kind of preconceived notions, when you're a little bit more kind of, agnostic about what those patterns might be, you notice that not all customers are created equal. I mean, it's kind of an obvious qualitative thing to say that some customers love you and are going to go through the gates of hell to stay with you. They're going to stay a long time. They're going to use your products and services very often. They're going to be easy to serve. They're going to recommend a lot of other people. So, very basic ideas, but they're borne out very strongly in actual data. In fact, when you take it from the data standpoint, the differences across the customers in this regard are really stark, and you just can't ignore them. So for years and years, I've been building the models to capture those differences and forecast them. That's all I like to do. But then there's the so what piece. How do we reallocate our resources? How do we realign our thinking? How do we develop entirely new strategies? And so to motivate people to use the models, I started to address those kinds of questions. That's what led me to start writing the books. And really quite simple. Not all customers are created equal. I mean, it's as simple as that. Some of them are more or less born to stay with you a long time and do a lot with you, and others are going to be one and done. We understand that. But the metrics that we use to manage a business, to evaluate a business, just tend not to line up with that. We use simple averages or kind of stereotypical notions about how customers behave instead of letting the data and the science really drive that kind of thinking.
Sure. I think that makes sense. You talk about the metrics and what are kind of historical metrics that are being used. So once a leadership team kind of buys into customer centricity, what what should they actually optimize? Like if you're looking at a small set of metrics, what should be at the center of dashboard if you're focused on customer centricity?
So there's really four components. So one is customer acquisition, just kind of sheer quantities. How many customers are we acquiring? How does that compare to the past? Are we on some kind of hockey stick growth curve in terms of acquisition? And then, as it says on the slide over here, there's retention. Not a big fan of NRR because that combines together two elements that often don't necessarily go together. So one is, are people staying with me or not, the retention part. But then there's what I'd call component number four, which is the spend part. I don't want to jam them together. I don't want to conflate them. So anyway, let me give you the list. So there's acquisition, there's retention. Are you still active with us? There's how active are you? So, how often are you making purchases? How often are you visiting the website, talking about us, posting ratings and reviews? So just any kind of just activity that's taking place while the relationship is active. And then the fourth one would be when you are active, how deep are you? How much are you spending? How many people are you referring? So I want to look at those four things as well as the associated costs. So, we talk all the time about CAC, customer acquisition costs. Very, very important to understand that. I also care about the ongoing kind of costs of kind of the care and feeding of our existing customers. Sometimes we downplay that one as well. And there'll be other costs that we should be both mindful of and careful about how we measure them and how we bring them in when we're looking at some of these upside metrics that I referred to. So it's not really that many metrics, and none of them are particularly like, whoa. It's just a matter of being clear, careful, consistent about the way we gather the data, calculate those metrics, the narratives we put around them. I just wanted to see that be part of the regular workflow for every company for their internal and external conversations.
Going back to the beginning, you said one of the first things you want to know what is their trajectory in terms of customer growth. How does that factor in? Does a company that's in heavy growth mode need to be looking at attrition differently secondarily, or is it more important because you're putting more customers into the funnel?
Oh, I love it, Brad. It's such an important question, and it's a real problem. So, when you combine a lot of these metrics together, putting aside the first one, just the acquisition one, but if you look at retention, repeat purchase or interaction and spend, you bring those three things together, that's customer lifetime value. That's most of what I do over here. Is really obsessing over CLV. And what we notice is that if you kind of really press the pedal to the metal on customer acquisition, you're kind of sacrificing quality in favor of quantity. If you just want to grow, 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 again, here comes the hockey stick. Then you're basically hoping if we just bring in as many people as possible, we do the whole network effect thing, we kind of crowd out competition, we figure out how to scale the business, that lifetime value will just follow quite naturally, or no one will ask us about it. Sometimes it's true that folks either aren't asking the right questions about it or are willing to accept inadequate assessments of it. But there sometimes is a trade-off there, and not that I want to give up on quantity. It's kind of important to fill the funnel and build the base, but we want to make sure we're doing it in a more balanced manner. We want to look at the quality of customers that we're acquiring today compared to the quality of customers that we acquired yesterday. That if we are scraping the barrel, if the ones that are coming in aren't very good, and if they're really expensive to bring in, then whoa, we should maybe take our foot off the gas and focus a bit more on quality instead of quantity. So it's finding that balance there, which firms don't do very well. And that's kind of both the bane of my existence and the purpose of my existence is to try to create more balance in the way that we look at the overall health of our customer base.
There's so many companies that are, because they're in high growth mode and they're putting in new customers in the funnel. If you're just looking at net attrition rate can kind of be hidden because you're adding so many new customers, and it may feel like you're doing a great job of keeping your customers when when you're looking at it from that perspective, it's a bit different. Vasu.
I got to double click on that, Brendan, because it is such an important point. To the extent that companies are reporting some kind of attrition rate, or let's be more positive about it, a retention rate, the an overall number isn't very indicative. You really, really care about those canaries in the coal mine, those recently acquired customers. And again, if you are scraping the barrel, they're going to be so much worse. And the ones you acquire tomorrow and the day after and the day after are going to be even worse, worse, worse. So don't give me that overall number. It's important to look at the dynamics of the attrition rate and try to make sure that today's customers, the ones we just acquired, maybe they're a little worse than the ones who were lining up around the block to buy us when we first opened shop. That's a natural thing. But as long as it's not falling off a cliff, then we're okay. But we got to be looking at that. And again, it just tends not to be just part of that regular workflow that companies do. Such a shame.
Sure. So I think a lot of executives really love the idea of customer lifetime value, but as they look at their data, usually spread out in various different systems, they're thinking, well, we're not quite ready for that yet. We can't make that step. We got to get our data cleaner. For teams that are successfully using your models, how clean or perfect does that data really need to be to get started? Particularly in subscription businesses.
There's so many reasons why executives hesitate on lifetime value. Part of it is the data. Part of it is I think, mistaken belief that, our company is different. Those rules don't apply to us. Or our customers are different and they're constantly changing. And so whatever the lifetime value, whatever we measured, yesterday no longer applies for tomorrow. Just a litany of reasons why they avoid doing it. I really think that the data reason isn't even top of the list. I think it's these broader fears or kind of mistaken notions about differences. Data is rarely the problem. If we can get, we don't even need to get full transaction log data. Sure, it would be great if we know exactly who was buying or renewing what when. Yeah, that's ideal. But we've noticed over the years, especially my co-author, my co-founder, Dan McCarthy, that sometimes if we get just a few metrics that just reflect the kinds of behaviors that I mentioned before, and if we can just track those metrics over time, even if it's at the aggregate level, that can be enough information for us to kind of reverse engineer and develop the same model that we would develop if we have the granular data. So we can get by with relatively little data and sometimes relatively short runway on it to make surprisingly accurate statements about what these customers will be doing at kind of a granular or aggregate or somewhere in between micro segment levels over fairly long periods of time. And I just wish people would give it a try, taste it, you'll like it. And once you see those lifetime values and you see that they are indeed a valid reflection of the future, the action steps that arise from them, running the business differently, back to this quality quantity balance, it becomes both essential, very feasible, and quite needle moving. It's really nice to be able to go back to the CFO and say, "See, it's working." That's the ultimate testimonial.
We were talking to a prospect a week or two ago, and they were describing how they've taken their customer base and they've broken them up into three buckets. That they've got this bucket, and this bucket, and how they're taking different actions based on the bucket they're in. I'm like, yeah, that's great. Can you imagine if you literally had an individual bucket for each customer, and you knew exactly how they were, how they were projected to act, or in terms of customer lifetime value, how much information that gives you as you're making decisions on how much should we spend to keep them, what opportunities do we have to upsell them, and that has tremendous value.
But let me also say, again, sorry for talking so much, but that idea of getting down to that one-to-one level, which again, these models work quite well for that. That also freaks people out from a lot of different standpoints. There is kind of, just privacy and creepiness, and even maybe more suspicion about our ability to understand and act at that very granular level. So I like to find a middle ground. And maybe we don't need to go all the way down to one, but at the same time, as I said before, we don't want to view the customer base as a whole, as a single entity either. We can find appropriate micro segments, relatively small but large enough groups of people that share relevant behavioral characteristics. And let's kind of talk about and act on them at that level. I think for a lot of companies, it might be a more effective way to do things. That there'll be very little loss of ROI if you kind of stop there. Going further, more granular, actually, it could sometimes hurt more than it helps. So don't have to overdo it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's say you're a company that's gone through the work. You now have these micro segments, at least a customer level, customer segment insight. How do you recommend executives communicate this framework of customer centricity and customer lifetime value to boards and investors who are perhaps more used to traditional metrics like average
Yeah.
return and CAC and revenue and LTV multiples?
Love it, love it, love it. Of course, I wish the question were going the other way. I wish that the board and the investors were demanding these metrics.
Right?
That's where we have to go. But either way, the set of metrics, it's going to relate to exactly what I said before. It's going to relate to acquisition. We're not going to forget about it, even if we're going to take our foot a little bit off the pedal. So acquisition, retention, repeat purchase spend, as well as the associated costs. And I don't want to get that single overall metric for each of those behaviors. I really want to see how it's evolving across the cohorts. So the ideal thing for me would be to see, for each different cohort, for each different cohort of customers, how many were in them? That's acquisition. How do how the retention rates vary across those cohorts? Now, and there is some tricky stuff there because we need to normalized for the fact that some of these cohorts have been with us forever. Others just made their first purchase. So we do have to find a way to level that playing field. But how are those churn rates and those repeat purchase rates and those spend rates varying across the cohorts? So we can make sure that those canaries in the coal mine, those young cohorts are doing okay. In fact, if a company's playing its cards right for a while there, the newer cohorts can sometimes be even better because we're expanding the product line, we're moving into new geographic areas, we're finding better product market fit. It's not going to last forever. That's why we need to keep updating it. Eventually, we will start to overfish the waters and the cohorts will get a little bit worse. But understanding, though, the cohort dynamics on those four key behaviors, acquisition, retention, repeat purchase spend, it's not asking that much. And again, we can get into all the nitty gritty about how we calculated. Vasu was waving around book number 3, the customer base audit. I appreciate your recommendation of it. That's what we do here. Is from just a purely descriptive standpoint, no models, no forecasts, just how should we be looking at the customer base in these terms, which then begs the question, how will it change in the future? And that's where the lifetime value comes in.
So the next question, we kind of touched on this a bit, but I think we could probably dive into it a bit deeper. This tension between board and investor expectations for rapid growth, but the discipline of trying to make sure that we're fishing for the right customers. If you're talking to a company who's established, they're not in startup mode, but they still have opportunities to grow, and they're trying to grow because maybe they've got a new PE firm that's come in that's putting that pressure on. What is the conversation to kind of find that right balance between the two, and where does that start?
You're asking such great questions. So first thing is, I want to come back to the beginning of the question. I'm just going to press pause on it. The distinction between that kind of fairly well-established company and the very young one, because the answer is going to be different for them.
Sure.
For the well-established one, there shouldn't be any tension. That if the board and the investors were asking the right questions, demanding the right metrics, then the alignment around lifetime value, the alignment around quality and quantity, we'd all be on the same page. And that's one of the most frustrating things for me. I know that every CEO has we do this internal offsite, and we get everyone thinking about long run, long run, long run. Then we meet with the investors and say, we're going to hit the quarterly numbers. Don't worry about it. That's the tension. Tension shouldn't exist. If we can get people to agree on the right set of metrics, internally and externally, the tension's gone. So private equity is itself is a canary in the coal mine that I love working with certain big PE firms and actually in particular some of the smaller growth equity firms who get the lifetime value thing. And again, spend a lot of time talking to me about bringing in these kinds of metrics and models and so on to have that appropriate long-term view when they're sizing up that digitally native men's underwear company or whatever. So sometimes we can just get that tension to melt away, and even some of the big boys in PE are being just a bit more open to it. They're recognizing that growth is more than just acquisition. And minimizing CAC, so we're making pretty good progress. I think we're much further along down this path than we were when I wrote the first of those books. There's still a lot more work to do, but I really think it's a generational thing. And that when today's students become tomorrow's CEOs and CFOs and Wall Street analysts and so on, that they'll be asking the right questions, they'll be judging the quality of the answers, and then making the right decisions. So let's just get rid of the tension, and I think we can do it.
I agree. You've used some of your metrics looking at like repeat purchases. If you're looking at a traditional non-subscription business versus a subscription business, how does that kind of change customer centricity or what you should be looking at?
Yes, again, you raise all these great distinctions. The non-subscription business, a retail or an airline, a hotel chain, a restaurant, which are most businesses, by the way, where
Sure.
people are buying kind of sporadically. Sometimes you're buying a lot. The kids are going off to college, go to Home Depot every day, and then you don't go for another 2 years. It's a mess to most people. We can deal with it. It's actually quite fine. The subscription world is great because of the regularity of the payments, the regularity of the timing, the size of the payments. Very importantly, the observability of churn. There's nothing better. Well, it's bad when people churn, but there's nothing better than knowing it when a customer raises their hand and said, "It's been fun, but I'm out of here." The problem in the non-subscription world is Home Depot or Amazon or McDonald's has no idea whether a customer's still active or not. They haven't done anything in a while. I'm wondering if they're gone or if they're just, on hiatus. So the observable attrition that we'll get from many subscription businesses, it's great. So it's a great area to get going with this stuff. I'd say in the subscription world, there's no excuse not to, because the data is so much more observable. The models are easier to build. But eventually things do get messy. Even if you are a subscription business, you start offering some of those discretionary one-time things. Everyone eventually becomes Costco, the hybrid business where there is the membership component and the discretionary things that you do while you're a member. Um, I used to spend my days and nights building separate models for every kind of business out there. But some of the math and modeling that we've done lately, I'll pretentiously call it CLV Ultra. That way, the models that we use at this company that I'm running, Theta. What's nice about it is that it bridges the differences across these companies. So whether you are a retailer or a pure subscription company or a Costco-like hybrid, to be able to have one model that's going to pick up those different kinds of behaviors and let you make apples to apples comparisons across seemingly different companies. I think that's a really, really big step forward, both from a management standpoint as well as an investor one.
So if you're talking to a subscription company who's now getting ready to dive into CLV, they have the easily observable churn rates historically of their customer base. What's kind of the first concrete steps for them to take to focus on CLV, and what does an early win look like for them that can give them some momentum and buy-in to lean into it even more?
So again, subscription is so good because we don't have to worry so much about, when are those purchases occurring? It's just, are they renewing or not? It's so much simpler. And so it's actually fewer metrics to look at. We're still going to look at acquisition, but then we can basically look at churn by cohort, and that's going to be incredibly indicative. That's the L part of customer lifetime value. And yes, we can look at, how much people are spending when they renew, but that tends to be fairly flat, fairly consistent across customers and over time. So you still want to look at it, but there's not nearly as much randomness and variation and uncertainty as there is with people buying stuff from Amazon. So looking at the retention rate, looking at it across cohorts, seeing how it evolves within and across cohorts, I should say, is very manageable. And we spent so much time developing the statistical methods that help you take the historical data and project it forward to know, what will that retention rate look like next period for this group? And even if we play the cross cohort game and we look at how each cohort has been evolving, we can start to make statements about the next cohort of customers even before we acquire them. Sounds like magic. And of course, it's a forecast. It could be wrong. But because there's so much regularity in the pure subscription domain, we'll often see these very regular changes across the cohorts. So like clockwork, we kind of know what those next few cohorts are going to look like. And it's great to be able to act on that. It's great to try to make the forecast incorrect. You know what? Because we see that they're going to be getting a little bit worse. We're going to take some actions now to make our acquisition process a little bit more effective, even if it's a little less efficient, so that we can actually kind of break the pattern and make that next cohort even better than it should be. There's a lot we can do, and it's not that hard. It's just not the way most companies and executives think about it yet.
It definitely would cause the valuation of the firm to look at that sales engine differently when they're seeing that the cohorts that are most recent are creating more value and would definitely tip the valuation higher than what you traditionally see, where you say it's kind of getting worse because we're overfishing the pond.
And to that point, when you look at things the right way, going back to our first question, when we take the differences across customers into account, instead of saying what is the churn rate, if we understand how those churn rates vary across customers and account for it, in most cases, it turns out that the customer base will be more valuable than if you just use the simple average number. So not only is it just kind of correct and actionable and not that hard, everything that I've been saying before, but you will be leaving money on the table if you rely on those simple averages, and that's a problem for all kinds of obvious reasons. So, if for no other reason, celebrate heterogeneity, the difference across our customers, in order to be able to see and get the full valuation of that company, not to mention all the tactical benefits.
Well, our time has flown by. Kind of our last question. You've talked about some of the more recent projects you're working on, and as you look back on these three books that you've written, what's changed in how companies think about and implement customer centricity, and what do you see coming up here in the future?
Love it. So many companies are aware of these issues. In the first book, the white covered one, where I was kind of going after companies that are sometimes touted as paragons of customer centricity. I remember going after Starbucks and Nordstrom and a couple of others, just looking at them as our own canaries in the coal mine, how far they've come in their mindsets, the metrics, just all the actions that they're taking. So many companies, I'm not going to take credit for it. I won't take the blame either, but are kind of waking up and recognize that not all customers are created equal. And we have the data, analytics, technology, competitive imperative to act on it. It's where the AI comes in. So it's become much more commonplace. Very few people are kind of pushing back against the ideas and saying, that's dumb, that's not how we're going to operate. But maybe they're not going far enough in terms of the metrics, the models, the forecast, the accountability, and everything that we've been saying. So for me, we're going to keep pushing on the kind of those quanti things. Again, making really good progress there. For me, the focus these days, believe it or not, and the focus of book number 4 is culture. Something that I know nothing about. I'm a quant guy. But I recognize in order to make this stuff happen and to keep it going, we got to have the right internal corporate culture so that people aren't doing this stuff either on a transient basis or with a gun to their head. They're choosing to do it. So that's book number 4, creating a customer-centric corporate culture and looking at companies that have been kind of sowing the seeds, hiring the right people, saying the right things that facilitates the metrics, the lifetime value, the actions. Ultimately, that's more important than the models themselves.
I love that. Well, Dr. Fader, thank you so much for spending time with us and bringing the ideas behind customer centricity and customer lifetime value to life. Your work's had a huge influence on how we at Vozic think about helping subscription businesses identify the right customers and not just more customers. And I know that our audience that are watching this are definitely walking away with more inspiration and some practical next steps. So we're grateful for your partnership today, everything you've contributed to the field, and I'll turn the time back over to Vasu.
Actually, this is a perfect end, Brandon. I think Dr. Fader's advice throughout with all the 3 books, what is the concept, what is the playbook, and how do you get started? This is just sequence because I have read it and I 100% agree and heavily recommending these books. And even the 4th book, which I didn't know before, Dr. Fader, I'm not sure if you read the recent MIT reports and all of this. Everyone is getting started with AI. Everyone is starting to trying to understand all of that. But they said they all came to the same conclusion, like what you are saying. Models are the easy part. It's the culture that is important. How do you bring the team together? How do you start with a small pilot? How do you make sure the concept is right? How do you align everyone on this very, very interesting idea that not every customer is equal, understanding that has tens of millions of dollars in impact. So looking forward to your 4th book. I'll be the first one in the line to buy that. Thank you very much for your advice today for our audience. And to close this one, if you are watching this live, type up your question on LinkedIn or Zoom. We'll wait for a minute or 2. We can answer this live, or we'll follow up with an answer or response to your question. Anyone who's watching this, DM your advice. We are celebrating these books. If you're short on these books, I have 100 of these copies in my room, so there is no shortage. I will make sure that you get your copy, right? And finally, Dr. Fader mentioned that he's helping companies getting started with these concepts through Theta. We are helping companies getting started with this concept, Vozic AI. If you are interested in having your customers evaluated or just simply wanted to have the conversation started, please get in touch with Dr. Fader, Peter Fader. On LinkedIn, you can find his contacts, or go to YouTube or go to Google, type his name. You will find a ton of ways to contact him, or you can contact us at vozic.ai or DM me with your address and I'll follow up with you. We are running a free trial. This actually gets you started with scoring your customers. As you are seeing on the right side, it allows you to identify your best customers. It allows you to identify the attributes of your best customers, customer level predictions for both risk and revenue. It comes with a business case and an implementation roadmap that we believe is going to be inspiring and easy to follow once you understand these concepts. So with that, thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Dr. Fader. Fascinating conversation. Have a nice rest of the day, everyone. Bye now.